Great to be here with union builders in two countries, and coming from a union that also has members in Canada. And how much I've learned in coming to Canada with our members here so often. And so often we say to members in the US, this is better in Canada, and this is better in Canada. And it's true. We talk about organizing rights. We talk about national health care. We talk about child care and higher education. Lots that we as sisters and brothers can learn from our sisters and brothers here. When we talk about building the political movement that Larry Hanley, probably more than any labor leader in either country, lives in his bones every day. Canada has the new Democratic Party, not just the conservative and liberal parties. And we have a different system in the US, hard to duplicate that, but the point is, much to talk about across this border besides just being in one country or another, or Blue Jays and Orioles. Congratulations to the Blue Jays. I come from Philadelphia, almost the worst team these days, but you know, we all get our turn. But let me just say about ATU and about these officers, the staff, and you as locals. And my brother and friend, your president. And actually, we became fast friends because from the first time he spoke at the AFL-CIO, actually about Chicago and the Riders Coalition that you had built and how that was a model, because we can't just represent as if a grievance or a contract is a separate thing. It's about building our power. And I learned from that story about Riders Coalitions and community action and how you were doing it there. And ever since that first conversation where Larry spoke up to say to unions in the US, we gotta stand up and fight back, not moan and groan and whine, not just say that this is the only alternative that we have, whether it's about our contract or about our candidates. And even if that's true in those moments, that we have to aim higher. We have to paint a picture or a vision that's worth fighting for. Because that's what inspires us. Something to inspire us, not just individually pushing a shopping cart across Canada, as inspirational as that is, or as inspirational as other speakers here are. But collectively, what can we do together? Not just in our local or even in our union, but together. And that's what Larry Hanley, it's in his bones. You heard one example after another of that already in these 2 days. 14,000 Uber drivers. I'm going to tell it like it is. Other unions went to Uber to make a deal with them. This union went to the drivers to say, stand up and fight back. And still other unions would have done nothing. Can't do nothing. Things like Uber, like it or not, are a part of what transportation is. Mostly immigrant workers who drive for Uber. That's what they find to support their families. We don't like it that we keep organizing our own work whether it's in this union or in my old union, over and over, they restructure. That's what capitalism is. They call it creative destruction. And all too often, it feels like we're picking up the pieces. And all too often, those pieces are working class people like us. And often that's not easy, and it's inconvenient. But not this union. This union didn't go to Uber. This union supported, amazingly, when Larry told me this story, 14,000 drivers at Uber organized almost as fast as Chuy Garcia got nominated for mayor of Chicago. And that's fast. Because they self-organized, supported by your union. Couldn't have done it. And now they will face what I saw for years, because I was an organizer in my own workplace, and then an organizer in my union, and eventually the organizing director, and then the executive vice president of the national union, responsible for organizing. And then as president of CWA, the chair of the AFL-CIO organizing committee. I know these organizing stories as well as I know my own two daughters. And these organizing stories, whether it's Uber or in our own union, the fight at T-Mobile or Verizon Wireless, that was a key aspect of that strike at Verizon. I was so proud of our union for carrying that strike out and of your support. We stand up and fight back. And for your union, on the political front, and you've heard it here, you have leadership, creativity, commitment. Not about, let me put my finger in the air and figure out who's going to win. And I can't wait to get to the candidate that's going to win. That's not Larry Hanley, and that's not the ATU. Now, and don't take that for granted, this kind of leadership. Now, what Larry said is true. I'm not here to tell my life story. Don't worry, don't look at your watch. This is going to be really quick, this part. But I decided not to run again for president of CWA. Number one, I was 65, 39 years, full-time. These kinds of organizing stories. But as Larry would tell you, 65 would not be a barrier at the AFL-CIO. The reason was because I believed that I felt like I needed to go back to the streets. It's not so different than pushing the shopping cart, except the difference was I could push the shopping cart with hundreds of thousands of people in the movement in the U.S. And when I decided not to run, I had known Bernie Sanders since he came to Congress, 25 years. And what Larry said is true. 2 days after my term ended, I went to Bernie. I had already talked to him and said, I want to volunteer. I don't want to work for you. There's a lot of reasons for that. But just kidding, Bernie. But, you know, I had a 39-year pension and had pledged to our members that I would give back. And you heard this from Nina, from Tulsi, from Chuy, from Larry, and these officers, and so many examples of local leaders that stood up and fought back, that said, as Fannie Lou Hamer said in 1964, the leader of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, when she went to Atlantic City and said to the Democratic Party leadership, including the President of the United States, Lyndon Johnson, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. Now, I grew up in North Philadelphia, not Ruleville, Mississippi, but in my own way have seen similar things over many decades. And I was sick and tired of people telling me we can't win. When Bernie Sanders, in May of 2015, said that he was going to run as a Democrat for President of the United States, immediately people said, he can't win. I was still president of the union then, and when we went to the AFL-CIO, right away, he can't win. Now, that's what they say about Uber drivers in New York City. That's what they say about ATU members in Atlanta fighting for better mass transit. Can't win. That's what they say about ATU in Buffalo, where you're in a bargaining stalemate. You can't win. This is what bosses say to us every day. We can't win, working class people. Chuy Garcia, Bernie Sanders, these are working class people. Bernie Sanders said from the very beginning, this is not about me. In the United States, we need political revolution. He said from the very beginning, the economy's not working for working class people. He said from the very beginning, the system is rigged, even in the United States, the oldest democracy. We don't have the minutes to go through, the time to go through all the barriers that exist in the U.S. to a 21st century democracy. Now, we know them in our heart, just like Fannie Lou Hamer said it, sick and tired of being sick and tired. And they didn't get seated that year, by the way. They got one delegate from the Democratic Party. The rest went home to continue the fight, not just for civil rights, but for what we all believe in here and what the Bernie Sanders campaign was about, or the Chuy Garcia campaign were about. And so we have to go deeper. We have to go deeper when we think about our political work. And again, your officers have hired two of my brothers from the Bernie Sanders campaign to work with locals across the country to begin to think about, in the U.S., to begin to think about how do we do our political work, how this year, with this election, and obviously defeating Trump is critical, but so is every other election, thousands and tens of thousands running for office. And how do we make something out of this? We don't have a new Democratic Party. How do we make something out of this? How do we get out of this box where, even with Barack Obama, a president I campaigned for in Iowa, as president of our union, in a similar way, people saying he can't win, and we showed that he could win, that we could have the first black president who's also brilliant of the United States of America. But unfortunately, and I got to know him pretty well, but unfortunately, in his last 100 days as president, he is still committed, and you heard from Larry about this. Our president, and when I saw him the last time one-on-one was a year and a half ago, he said, Larry, you're taking this TPP fight too personally. I said, I'm taking it personally? And unfortunately, that again would be a longer story. But unfortunately, this is what he is focused on in his last 100 days. Not what he was focused on when we campaigned across Iowa in 2007 and 2008. But instead, passing the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And as Chuy just said, we continue to gain ground. Another member of Congress from Illinois yesterday said no to the TPP, but we could lose the TPP vote because, sadly, our president is intent on a vote in what's called the lame duck session of Congress. Most Americans here know it. It's after the election is over. Congress comes back for about 4 weeks. The TPP is 5,500 pages. It's got a chapter on almost any industry you can think of, written by the lobbyists from that industry, written by the bosses. Labor was in an advisory committee. That experience was so bad, every member of that advisory committee said no TPP. As you just heard from Larry, every union in the United States, normally we never unite on anything, said no TPP. Mr. President, no, reject it, don't bring it. But don't go to sleep. And don't just focus on November 8th. We need to ask every member of Congress, every candidate who's running, tell us now, which side are you on the TPP? Don't tell us after Thanksgiving. Now, led by your local 241 in Chicago, this is what people saw at the Democratic Convention. These signs. Anybody have one? Hold them up. 308. Got the wrong local. This is Chicago, right? Chicago, wrong local, right city. Hold them up. No TPP. This is what they saw throughout the convention, led by ATU. Thank you, sisters and brothers from Chicago. Many, many reasons why we care about stopping the TPP, but just one. If we only cared about transit, and obviously this whole convention is about one thing, that if we only care about what we care about, we never win. But if we have a broader vision about working class people, whether it's in Canada or the United States, if we dig in with riders, if we elect people and try to elect people who actually are working class people, who have our vision, that then we can win. But if we only were thinking about transit in the TPP, think about this. Our trade deals since NAFTA have all been about one thing, really two things. Number one, investment. Investment doesn't mean public investment. Investment means multinational corporations who are investing outside their own country. So who's that for people in this room? Anybody here ever hear of Veolia? Yeah, boo Veolia, right? It's a four-letter word, even though it's not. French-owned multinational corporation. Investors come first in every trade deal since NAFTA. If any country or any city does anything when there's a trade agreement that has in the agreement the protection for investors, they gave it a gibberish name, Investor State Dispute Settlement. It's been in almost every agreement we've signed since 1994 when NAFTA was passed. ISDS is the initials. And what that means is that if any country does anything after an agreement is signed that limits the profits of any foreign corporation, they can sue that government, not in a court, but in a global tribunal where 3 corporate lawyers would hear the case. And Larry mentioned that it's true. I did a fair amount, particularly in Central America and Colombia, union-to-union work, where people were under attack and literally people I knew were murdered. We filed complaints under NAFTA with Mexico, under CAFTA with Honduras, Guatemala. The best we ever got was a report. Years after those murders, we get a report. Investors, multinational corporations, Veolia, they get reparations. We're supposed to believe reparations is a bad word. We don't have to apologize for slavery. We don't have to do anything special for communities where people are still suffering from the legacy of it. Generations of oppression and racism. But no, but the biggest corporations in the world, they get reparations. Billions of dollars in reparations. TransCanada, sorry Canadians, is suing the United States now because we turned down the Keystone Pipeline for $15 billion under NAFTA because that decision by President Obama conflicts with the investor provisions, according to TransCanada, of the NAFTA agreement. They come first. They get reparations. They get to go to a global tribunal with corporate lawyers hearing that case. Our sisters and brothers get murdered or our rights as workers get trampled on, we get a report. And even worse, TPP and every trade agreement since NAFTA supports, encourages privatization of every job in this room. Privatization didn't fall out of the sky. It wasn't just bad elected officials. We are promoting it because multinational corporations have convinced our government and this Canadian government that their rights are critical or there'll be no capital to invest where we live in our countries or our cities. It's extortion. If they can't get that, they don't want to invest. And more importantly, as Bernie Sanders said in that campaign, the democracy is largely rigged with big money pouring in. That election in the U.S., which we need to participate in, don't take this the wrong way, $7 billion is the cost of that election and the ads that you're now seeing, and they will step up and up and up, and in many cases you won't know who's paying for them. This is a connected story. Bernie Sanders, in that campaign, talked relentlessly about the TPP, and I'm glad to say, mainly thanks to Bernie Sanders, at the end of October, Hillary Clinton said the trade agreement TPP that I had called the gold standard, now I reject it. And she has rejected it ever since. But for every local based in the USA, in this room, that's doing political work, that's saying, well, this candidate is better than this one, for every member of the House and those running in the Senate, I want you to shout out that you're going to ask them, which side are you on the TPP? Not after the election, but now, before the $7 billion election. Tell us, which side are you on? Our revolution. Tulsi Gabbard talked about it yesterday. Chuy Garcia just now, minutes ago. And as Larry said in introducing me, this is the successor to the Bernie Sanders campaign. Political revolution is now our revolution. So all the millions of people that supported Bernie in that database and the emails, now we are trying to continue that revolution, to elect working class candidates and people that support working class people, people that support public services, people that support national health care like we have here in Canada. Ask the Canadian sisters and brothers. It's a floor to walk on. It isn't perfect. But you don't have collective bargaining where the very right to have health care is up for grabs. We don't have collective bargaining in Canada where you have thousands of dollars in deductibles, even for people who have health care coverage. We don't have to start so low here. And so our revolution is about supporting those kinds of candidates. Some of them, Vernon Miller running for state school board, Native American in Nebraska, and all the way up. And this, right now, is what I would call messy, because the campaign ended. This was created as a successor. We created a terrific board. Nina Turner is one of the 11 people on our board. 9 others similar. Fighters for social justice, whether from labor or immigrant or civil rights, environment. And this union unites all of that. No other union that I know of has a climate change committee. That's not an obvious thing. It's another example of your leadership. Connect the dots. Paint a picture that's broader so we have enough people together with us. And the environmental threat of TPP is even worse than what it means to us as workers. But our revolution, the idea here, is not just candidates. It's also state issues. Go to that website, ourrevolution.com. You'll see ballot measures. ATU is the best union at ballot measures. I know the story in Atlanta of putting mass transit on the ballot. It's great success. We've got to use the tools we have while we build the democracy that we need. And our revolution is about issues. Last Wednesday was National Call-In Day on TPP, and I'm proud to say that our revolution made almost more calls than all the other organizations, including all of labor, and that is a little sad, put together to members of Congress directly from people in their districts saying, enough is enough. We want you to be against the TPP, but tell us which side you're on. So, with Larry's support and these officers, my plea to you is this. Don't give up. Stand up. Don't just tell our members, this is how we're voting because this one is better. Do that. Absolutely do that, but don't just do that. We've got to dig deeper, particularly in the U.S. Like Fannie Lou Hamer, or Bernie Sanders, or Nina Turner, or Tulsi Gabbard, or Chuy Garcia. We've got to be willing to do things that are different. Like Larry Hanley encouraged us to do, including me, by the way. He calls up with a new idea every month. Don't let him tell you he doesn't talk to me since I went to work for Bernie Sanders, as a volunteer, I might add. He's always got a new idea. And so our revolution, the idea is that we build committees, organizing committees in every state, not just for this election, more importantly, beyond this election. And that hopefully the 5 national unions, there are only 5, CWA joined ATU in supporting Bernie Sanders. But it's not like we're driving a bus and looking in the rearview mirror. If sisters and brothers here supported somebody else for president, Secretary Clinton or someone else, that's fine. We're looking ahead. And the question is, will we commit some small part of the energy of our local union to trying to build something deeper? Can we commit to fighting for a democracy where big money doesn't control us? Can we commit to fighting on voting rights? That whether we're black or brown or young or old, and those are the groups that are targeted by voter suppression, that those of us who are not black or brown or young or old, but all the rest, understand that when we lose millions of voters, we're missing 20, 30, 40 million voters in the United States as we go to this $7 billion election, excluded for one reason after another. And we have to fight against that kind of suppression. They're excluded because they were immigrants with a green card and they had to pay $800 for a path to citizenship, even though in previous generations, immigrants were dragged into vote. Or they're excluded because they don't have a voter ID in states that are passing that one after another. And if you don't have a driver's license, you have to spend hours to get that ID in so many of these states. Or they're excluded because they're young and they moved too many times. Or they're excluded because they're old and they didn't have a driver's license and they couldn't get the voter ID. Adds up to 40 million missing voters. So when we put all this together, and when we look at the program that you've launched with Clem Balinoff and Becker and others, when they come to you in a local and say, will you throw in with this new political action program of ATU? Part of that is our revolution. And you can tell Balinoff or Becker, yeah, sign me up. Or any of you can go. OurRevolution.com, go to the website and say join. No money, just join. And then we'll ask you to volunteer. We'll ask you to make calls against the TPP. We'll ask you to look at the list of candidates and if they're in your area. We'll ask you to look at the ballot measures, which are in most of the states. But mostly, we'll ask you to stand up and fight back. We'll ask you to carry on with the 13 million voters who voted for Bernie and millions more who may not have, but who share those basic beliefs that we can build a 21st century democracy in the USA, that we can fight for fair trade, not trade deals that lead to more privatization and greater profits for multinational corporations, that we can fight for health care for every American, no matter their wealth, without gigantic deductibles and copays and gibberish that you never even understand, that we can fight that every kid will have some opportunity to higher education without tens of thousands of dollars in debt, that we can fight that workers at Uber or anywhere else should have a right to organize without marching through hell to get a union that many of us were born into when we went to work. And so let's remember that when they told Bernie Sanders he can't win, most unions joined in that chorus. This union didn't. This union stood up and fought back, along with my union and many others. And Labor for Bernie, which grew to 80,000 unionists, regardless of what their national union had done, said, we do believe that we can win, if not now, soon. We believe that it's worth fighting for candidates like Chuy Garcia and Bernie Sanders. We believe that it's worth building organization, party building, challenging the Democratic Party, not just the DNC, but in your state. And that's why we build our revolution, to say we're going to challenge the party, or we'll build a new one, or we'll do both. And that if nothing else from the Bernie Sanders campaign that we all learn, it's one thing. We believe that we can win. Say it with me. We believe that we can win. 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 Thank you very much, ATU.